Welcome, everyone, to this briefing brought to you by the Israel Defense and Security Forum, IDSF. It's a great pleasure to be back with you after the break for the holiday. And I'm joined today by the founder and chairman of IDSF, Brigadier General Amir Avivi. General, thank you so much for joining today.
My pleasure.
General, there is so much to discuss. We haven't been on air for a whole week now. And really at the top of the list that everyone is really asking about is what is happening with the regime in Iran. Is there still a meeting of the minds between the US and Israel that there needs to be a military option on the table for the nuclear program? What can you share with us?
First, I think that from day one, since the very beginning, when Israel and the US started dealing with Iran, Israel said all along, you cannot reach anything without a viable, credible military threat on Iran and the willingness to use it. I mean, a credible threat means that you are serious and you really mean it. You really are willing to attack. And I think that this is something that we can say crystal clear. The US and Israel are willing to attack Iran. Israel, that's for sure. We know that Israel all along has said that they want to attack. But I think that we see in the last few weeks the US amassing more and more forces in the Middle East. We see strategic bombers. We see more ships. The Carl Wilson that came all the way from the Pacific with a huge air power. And we see a whole air train of planes bringing munitions to Israel, the most advanced munitions there are. Every day almost, we have Hercules landing in Israel and bringing munitions to the Israeli Air Force, including the Moab, the mother of all bombs. So definitely Israel and the US are preparing for a massive attack on Iran. Having said that, it's understandable that the president wants to really try first and get an agreement. I mean, if we can get the Iranians to dismantle completely their nuclear sites without a war, without ballistic missile shot at Israel, without attack, I'm sure that the president would like to do that. But really the key issue here is put very short, clear timetable for that. And we heard President Trump talking about May and not extending these talks too much, being very clear what the result must be. The Iranians are masters in deceive, in how to manage this kind of talks, and you need a lot of experience. And we saw as the US was having the second meeting with Iran, that at the same time, Dermer and the head of Mossad were on the ground giving Israel's inputs on these talks. Overall, I don't believe the Iranians, I don't think they're going to dismantle their nuclear sites. They're going to do everything to deceive and try to go around these talks. And I think that eventually there will be no choice but to attack them, and the sooner the better. Israel is definitely preparing all the capabilities in order to attack in Iran. There won't be probably ever again a better opportunity that now. Syria fell. Hezbollah is really on the verge of collapse. We see hundreds of what remain from Hezbollah commanders leaving Lebanon to South America, and Israel constantly degrading them more and more, and the Lebanese becoming more emboldened and saying clearly they want to dismantle them as an armed terror organization. So Hezbollah is completely out of the equation. Syria also, Hamas also. And the US is attacking fiercely the Houthis every day, more and more attacks. There will be a moment where all these attacks are going to create the impact needed and hopefully a collapse of the Houthis. The Houthis overall are a militia of around 200,000 terrorists. In Yemen, there are 500,000 more armed forces that oppose the Houthis. 300,000 of them is the forces of the former government, the Yemeni government. Then you have around 150,000 forces supported by the Saudis, and additionally forces supported by the UAE. So when you take all these forces that are Sunnis, who want to get rid of the Houthis, who are controlling a certain area in Yemen, these forces are getting more and more emboldened. They see the US attack and the resolution to really destroy the Houthis, and they're starting to mobilize, very similar to what happened in Syria. So Iran is losing all its proxies, maybe a part of the Iraqi militias, which are deterred and are not doing anything. And they lost their air defense. They lost some strategic sites. This is the moment to hit them and destroy all their capabilities. I think that it's natural that the president, before doing a military attack, has to show to the American people and also to the world that he's really willing to try to get a diplomatic solution. But it needs to be very confined, very clear, not let the Iranians play around. And what worries Israel in the last few days is that the Iranians, with all their sophistication, might manage to play with the administration, with Witkoff, and deviate the administration from really decisive action and attack to starting to have agreements that the Iranians can play around with. So this is what's going on in Iran. We heard Prime Minister Netanyahu this week in Motzei Shabbat addressing also the Iranian issue and saying crystal clear, Israel is not going to let Iran become nuclear, even if it means that Israel needs to attack alone. We need to understand that. This is the reality on the ground. When I visited Washington a bit more than a month ago, I met with different advisors in the White House and in the State Department. My impression was that Israel and the US are aligned completely. And there is a very close coordination between the countries. It doesn't look like the kind of talks in Obama's time or Biden's time. Both countries are very much aligned.
Now, General, let me ask you a question. There's no doubt that President Trump is very much looking at the U.S. economy and all of these broader foreign policy decisions, how they potentially impact the U.S. economy. So in terms of a joint strike on Iran, what does that do for the bigger picture of the U.S.? Does it allow building bridges with Saudi Arabia and other countries and thereby increasing trade? Or does it put the U.S. into a more of a wartime economy? Meaning what broader implications could be governing this decision, do you think?
I don't look at an attack on Iran as beginning a war. I look at it as ending the war. I look at it as an operation, not a war. Might be a very, very strong operation, which might last a week, 2 weeks, maybe a bit more. But this is not starting a war because Iran doesn't have the capability to sustain a war against the US, and they don't have their proxies anymore. And if they try to do things that might aggravate the administration, they can really destroy Iran completely, including their oil, their navy, everything. And I'm not sure how much the Iranians really want to take this chance, and also maybe the chance that the US will do what Israel did throughout this war, topple the whole leadership. Um, so they have to be very careful in what they're doing. So I don't see it as the beginning of a war. And at the end of the day, the big vision, as we mentioned, Moshe, is building a Western Israeli moderate Sunni coalition, a front that will create new routes of trade, that will bring huge prosperity. And in order to do that, you really, really need to cut the head of the snake and take out of the equation the number one destabilizer of the Middle East. And this is Iran. Everything that's going on in this war is Iran. That destabilized the whole Middle East, and we need to stabilize it. And we also need to be aware not only of the Shia axis of Iran, but also the radical Sunni axis of Turkey, of Qatar, of Julani, ISIS, Al Qaeda, all these guys. And building this Israeli Western Sunni moderate front, this will help also counter Sunni radicalism, not only Shia radicalism.
I want to ask one more question on this topic before we switch to something else, which is there a concern that a large-scale Israel-US strike on the regime in Iran would trigger other countries to retaliate, whether on some level it's Russia, China, or Turkey? Is that a concern?
No, I don't see it as a concern. And I think that for Turkey, Iran is an adversary. The Turks are Muslim Brotherhood, they are Sunnis, the Iranians are Shias, they're adversaries. I don't see the Turks really sad about weakening Iran. They're adversaries. As for Russia, I think that Russia is very much looking to have an agreement with the US to finish the Russian-Ukrainian war in a way that the Russians can maintain all the areas that they conquered. The Russians, for many, many years, have stated what are the areas they believe belong to them. And when you look at the map of what they conquered, they pretty much conquered what they said belongs to them, which is the Donbas area, which they control today, which was predominantly held by a society that is pro-Russian, and of course along the Black Sea, and they are holding all the areas they said that belongs to them. So I'm sure they would be happy to finish the war along the front lines that exist today. And for this, they need the US. They need the US to say clearly that they're not going to continue supporting Ukraine. They're not going to continue sending munitions. They want a resolution now. And this will distance Russia from Iran. It will enable Russia to get closer, more back to the West, and not be also so dependent on China the way it is now because of the sanctions. So when we look at the idea of breaking this Chinese, Russian, Iranian front, the way to deal with Russia is ending the war and getting them closer to the West. The way to deal with Iran is attacking them and dismantling their capabilities. The way to deal with China is isolating them, breaking this alliance, and creating these new routes of trade, which will make the US and the West the leading force in this new Silk Way, and not China. So the West will control the main routes of trade between East and West. This is, I would say, like the overall strategy.
General, let's talk about Gaza for a moment, if we can. Throughout this war, we have seen new technologies being deployed in the field, aiding our soldiers in their mission of destroying Hamas. And there's a new technology being discussed that I think you can shed some light on. Of course, the D9 bulldozer is one of the heroes of this war, and you can very much share about that. And now there's an unmanned version of the bulldozer. Can you discuss this a little bit?
Yes, I've been involved in the development of the robotic D9T already 20 years ago. What enabled the idea of creating robotic D9s is the development that we see also today, of course, in cars. It's the fact that the D9s became digital. You have different kinds of D9. You have D9N, you have D9R. What makes the D9T special is that it's all computerized and digital, and because of that, there was a capability of interfacing with the computer of the D9 and make it completely robotic. In the beginning of the war, we had very, very few D9s like that are completely robotic. But very fast, it was clear that it's something that we really need, and the army with the industries moved forward to really create more and more D9s. I cannot discuss the numbers. I know them, but I cannot discuss them. But obviously, sending a D9 without soldiers, operating the D9 from afar, it's much, much, much more safer and reduces the risk to the soldiers, because in a D9, usually you have two soldiers. The D9s are not armored the way tanks are. They are less fortified, and therefore it's a danger to the soldiers. And if you can operate them from afar, this is a huge advantage, and the army really now utilizes them more and more.
And just explain for those of us unfamiliar, what exactly does a D9 do? Why has it been so critical in Gaza?
Well, the D9 basically, one of the main missions of the combat engineers is to breach obstacles. And we see that the number one way Hamas, and it was also Hezbollah, are dealing with the IDF is placing huge amounts of improvised explosive devices on the roads, under the roads. So before you move forward with tanks and APCs, you really want to clear the roads from improvised explosive devices and booby traps. And the D9 does it in a very, very effective and safe way. This is one mission. The other mission is demolishing. We know that there are many houses that are booby trapped, and in places where we understand that a place is booby trapped, we simply bring it down. And sometimes we bring it down with terrorists inside the house. So demolishing obstacles and overcoming obstacles, it's also something very important that D9 does. And the third thing is about building bases inside Gaza, or even if a platoon or tanks, they stop for a few hours, the D9 comes and fast builds around them some kind of fortification to defend the forces. So these are the main missions. And I remember already in the second Lebanese war, to me, although this wasn't a very historical war, to me it was historical in a way, because it was the first war, I think, ever in the history of mankind, modern history of wars, that an army operated more D9s than tanks in the war. In the second Lebanese war, we were operating with 300 tanks, and also these tanks were not all of them all the time inside Lebanon, but we operated with more than 300 D9s. inside Lebanon, and everyone was complaining there is not enough D9s. Nobody complains there is not enough tanks, but there were not enough D9s in the war. Just to put things in perspective, how advanced Israel is in using armored bulldozers. When America invaded for the first time Iraq in the 90s, they had 0 armored bulldozers. So when America invaded Iraq, my battalion sent 12 armored bulldozers to Iraq. And it was the first time the US operated armored bulldozers. At the same time, we were operating in operations in Gaza with 200 bulldozers, in small Gaza, not the whole Iraq, yes. Iraq like 1,000 Gaza. So in Israel, it has always been a big deal. It's amazing to see that every operation, every war we have had in the last 20 years, always at the end they say, we don't have enough combat engineers. We need more. We need more Yahalom, we need more D9s, we need more combat engineer battalions. And the combat engineers are becoming a huge, huge core. Because everything is about tunnels, it's about improvised explosive devices, it's about urban areas that requires a lot of demolition and bombs and TNT and so on. This is the kind of warfare we are experiencing.
Thank you, General. I have one more question. Before that, I just want to pause and make a request from all of our loyal followers and viewers who watch these briefings and learn a lot. If you can kindly like, subscribe, and share on YouTube this channel, it really, really helps us out a tremendous amount. As I mentioned before we went on break for the holiday, we're trying to reach 25,000 subscribers. Every single person watching this has the ability to do something to really promote our movement, to promote national security, and help us defend Israel together. It doesn't cost anything. All you need to do is like, subscribe, and share this channel. Thank you so much. General, final question for the day. There are those who are claiming that Israel is on the verge, on the brink of a civil war with all of the domestic issues that are happening right now. What are your thoughts on that?
There won't be any civil war in Israel. I think that the vast, vast majority of the Israeli society is united. Zionists want to win the war. We see, although there is a lot of noise in the media and letters here and there, that on the ground there is no demonstrations because people are fed up of demonstrations. Very, very few people show up to demonstrations. Nothing like we saw before the war. What we have been dealing during Pesach a lot is this really shameful letters that were published again in the name of units, whether it's supposedly pilots or Mossad or A200 or whatever, saying we need to get the hostages and stop the war, which basically is saying, let's lose the war. The problem with these letters is that first, it's done in the name of units or using the army, and this is politicizing the IDF, and this is something that is not acceptable. And indeed, the chief of staff ordered to fire any person that is active reserve and signed the letter. By the way, even generals. There were generals from the Air Force that are still they don't necessarily actually do active reserve, but usually generals are forever in reserve, whether they are active or not. So they fired them. The army fired them and said, okay, that's it. You cannot be on our list. You won't be in reserve. So obviously very few people were willing to sign the letter because the policy now, unlike the year before the war, the policy now is very clear. We fought this fiercely. We also created a petition calling to reach all goals of war. All of us want to see the hostages back. But I think that two things are crystal clear. One, the only way to bring the hostages back is military pressure, diplomatic pressure, and civil pressure, talking about the humanitarian aid, and that we need to reach all goals of war. We need to eradicate Hamas. It's a governmental and military entity, and we need to make sure that never, ever again there will be a terror army in Gaza. And I'm happy to see that the government and the defense establishment are very resolute in reaching all goals of war. Yes, we're trying to do everything we can to bring the hostages back. And these letters, by the way, are undermining our hostages. They are giving strength to Hamas. These are letters that are 100% aligned with Hamas. They are saying exactly what Hamas is saying, that we need to stop the war. And this is not something we can agree to. I think these letters are one of the main reasons why Hamas didn't agree to a deal now. And the only thing left to do is mount the pressure on Hamas until we bring them on the verge of collapse and agreeing to release the hostages. And if not, we have to destroy them. So we heard Prime Minister Netanyahu explaining these issues and saying we're going to reach all goals of war. And also, really for the first time, I heard the Prime Minister explaining why, saying that, what's the problem? Let's get the hostages. Let's lie to Hamas. And then once they give us the hostages, we'll go and destroy them. And he said, maybe Hamas is evil, but they're not stupid. They're not going to sign a deal like that without having the major powers in the world really making sure that Israel cannot go back to war, including sanctions and so on. So there is no scenario where we can just lie and say, okay, give us the hostages, we won't do anything, and then attack. Doesn't work like that. So really what's left to do is what we did throughout the war. We brought almost 200 hostages back by putting military pressure, by pressuring diplomatically, and by also pressure through the humanitarian aid. And now that we have the full support of the US, this is much easier for us to do, to pressure them to the extent needed to bring back the hostages, and we need to put more pressure.
Brigadier General Amir Avivi, thank you so much for all of your leadership during this war. And thank you for joining us today. Thank you to all our viewers and supporters for tuning into this briefing. We will be back with you tomorrow, 10 a.m. Eastern Time, 5 p.m. here in Israel. Until then, stay safe, stay strong. Take care, everyone.